Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The mysterious mistress to the King of England, Nell Gwyn. Throughout the centuries, there have been many kings of England who have taken mistresses. King Henry VIII was known for it, and he even took the sister of Anne Boleyn as his mistress, whilst he was married to his first wife. But there was a woman who, during the reign of King Charles II, who rose to prominence inside of society, and she began as a king's mistress, and had 2 sons by the king. Nell Gwyn was one of many of the king's mistresses. In fact, he was known to have had 13 during his life. But whilst Charles II was dying, he said on his deathbed to his son, not to let poor Nellie starve. The king wished for his son, the Duke of York, his heir, to look after the woman who he shared many good times with. But what is her story? As a child, she was considered to have worked in a number of low-class jobs. Different stories tell her of selling herring, oysters and turnips on the streets, or working as a servant. But during the rule of Oliver Cromwell, as the Lord Protector, theatre had been banned across the nation under the strict Puritan rules, but when Charles II came onto the throne, he brought it back, and also formed 2 acting companies and legalised acting for women as a profession. In 1663, the King's Company opened a theatre which today is known as the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane, and inside of it a friend of Nell Gwyn's had been granted a licence to vend, utter and sell oranges, lemons and fruit, sweetmeats and all manner of wares within the theatre. Nell was hired by a woman who was allowed to do this, and was also a prostitute. And Nell and her elder sister worked as orange girls. They would walk in the aisles, scantily clad sell oranges and other snacks inside of the theatre. Charles II frequently attended the performances, but Nell dreamed of a life on stage. She joined the actresses at Bridges Street, and she was also known for being good looking and having a strong, clear voice. She was taught performance by Thomas Killigrew, one of the finest actors at the time, and she also learnt how to dance. She appeared on stage, and she is considered one of the first actresses. But by 1665, she had begun to carve a reputation for herself being pretty and witty. And Samuel Pepys even wrote of her work on stage. She found comfort in the comedy genre and played a number of key roles. But as the Great Plague swept through London, the theatres were shut. Nell Gwyn and her mother left for Oxford following the King's Court, as the King's Company would perform plays and entertain the King whilst he was away from the pestilence in the capital. When the theatres reopened, Pepys praised Nell's performance in a show, saying, "There is a comical part done by Nell, which is flourimal, and that I never can hope ever to see like that done again, by man or woman." The King and the Duke of York were at the play, but so great performance of a comical part was never, I believe, in the world before as Nell do this, both as a mad girl, then most and best of all when she comes in like a young gallant, and hath the notions and carriage of a spark, the most that ever I saw any man have. It makes me, I confess, admire her. However, a love affair between King Charles II and Gwyn began around April of 1668. She was attending a performance of a show, and in the next box was the king, who was more bothered in flirting with her than he was watching the play. Following this, she was invited for supper with the king and his brother, the later King James II. It was even said that after dinner, Nell had to pay for the meal, because the king did not have any money on him. But she began to become closer to the king, and despite the king having a wife and many other mistresses, Nell was considered his favourite. During her first few years with the king, there wasn't much competition for her against other mistresses, but she gave birth to a son named Charles on the 8th of May 1670, and this would be the king's 7th son by 5 different mistresses. But she did find rivalry with Louise de Keroualle, who came from France, and she was the complete opposite of Nell. She was sophisticated and of very noble birth, but Nell was an orange seller, and she did not like the French mistresses at all. They were known to get together at tea for chords, but they were advisories. She returned to the stage, which was considered shocking as she was the mother to a royal child. But in the February of 1671, she then moved into a townhouse at Pall Mall. This was owned by the king, and the lease was transferred to Nell Gwyn. She stayed here for the rest of her life, and she felt that she was tied to the crown because of this lease, but eventually she became the owner of the property. But her liaisons with Charles II continued, and she gave birth to a second child to the king, another son named James, in 1671, but he died at the age of 10 in Paris, where he had been sent to school. The king continued to reward Nell Gwyn for her service, and she was given a house on the edge of Home Park in Windsor, and when Charles was at the castle there, Nell lived close by. Also, she owned a summer residence on the King's Cross Road, and she would entertain the king with concerts, breakfast, and other antics that the king would enjoy. Now, Nell, unlike her rivals, was not greedy, and when she first knew the king, she asked only for £500 a year. However, she was then given thousands through different funds. She never received a title, but got one for her son, and he became the Duke of St Albans. Despite getting houses, she seemed to be a bit of slight normality for Charles, and he did like this. However, King Charles II died on the 6th of February 1685, and James II was instructed to ensure that Nell Gwyn did not starve. Eventually, all of Nell's debts were paid off, and she was given a modest pension of £1,500. Her mortgage was paid off at a Nottinghamshire residence, but within 2 years she got sick herself. In the March of 1687, Nell suffered a stroke which left her paralysed on one side. And then 2 months later she had another stroke which left her bedbound in London. It was said that she died from apoplexy, possibly due to syphilis, on the 14th of November 1687 at 10 in the evening, less than 3 years after Charles II's death. She was only 37 at the time of her death, and she had a huge bank balance and a huge amount of plate and wealth gifted to her from the Merry Monarch. She was buried in the Church of St Martin in the Fields of London. However, Nell Gwyn's legacy is a very interesting one. She was remembered as a quick-witted and sharp-tongued mistress to the king, and she stood out amongst the king's lovers. It was claimed that she regularly referred to herself as the king's whore, and she is even commemorated in London in statue form, being the only royal mistress ever to have done so. She was a talented actress who captured the attention and hearts of many of her audience, including the most important man in the land. She is the orange seller whose rag to riches story made her the spark in the eye of the Merry Monarch. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.